Management of international financial services forward. In order for a company to function correctly, it's important to strike a balance between the aspect of its business and consideration of its employees. Thus, labor management is of utmost importance. Addressing these labor matters requires the fulfillment of a series of laws and regulations through an entire process, from hiring employees and securing them to their Social Security benefits to prevention of occupational hazards. For these reasons, the Manual on Labor Consulting will cover all the key elements that any business should take into account from the start of hiring process through to the duration of the worker's employment. Thus, we will start this course with an introduction of employment and labor counseling, wherein we will discuss all the elements that under no circumstances should be neglected if we want to create an equally beneficial relationship between the company and the employees. We will be touching on important themes such as job security, affiliation, and registration of employees as well as employers, and the establishment and stratification of specialized professional groups in the workplace. In addition, in the first chapter, we will discuss salary variations and bonuses, as well as withholdings and assumptions, and we will examine the equation used to calculate payroll and settlement. Next, we will discuss Social Security and examine the potential benefits that it offers to workers. And another major issue to be addressed is that of labor and employment contracts. Here, there are four main types I presented: permanent, temporary, those of training and apprenticeships, and all along with the type of employment that goes along with each one. Both collective agreements and temporary work company agreements will be discussed. Lastly, we will cover the prevention of occupational hazards, a truly important issue that is essential in achieving a healthy work environment, a goal that is tangible benefits for the health and safety of both the company and the employee. And in regard to this manual, it is important to note that all of the issues and themes have been discussed in a generic fashion. Thus, in the annex, we have provided a case study that further addresses the subject of Social Security. International employment on a global scale, so as to get a better understanding of the implications for other countries. Module 1, Introduction to Labor Consultancy in Human Resources. As we know, it is of utmost importance for the company to find the best candidates for the job, and for this reason, a vetted hiring process should always be undertaken. Whereas we recognize the importance of the above-mentioned process, for the purposes of the lesson, we will not be focusing on the hiring process per se, but instead of all the subsequent actions and considerations that must be undertaken once the employees have been hired. For this reason, after finding suitable candidates, the process of human resource management occurs after having chosen the most qualified candidates is one of the true keys of success. Generally, when we talk about labor consulting and human resources, we are referring to the organizational procedures necessary to successfully carry out all the necessary steps required of a company and this working relationship. To this process, we must take into account the following elements: registration of Social Security. Employees, prior to initiating their new employers must apply for and enroll them in the Sistema de la Seguridad Social, Social Security System, indicating whether it is an Institution Nacional de la Seguridad Social, National Institute of Social Security, or the other one, mutual accidents and so on, mutual insurance of workplace accidents and professional illnesses. The employer has the freedom to choose between INSS or the mutual insurance company, Multi-Acta, since both offer the same coverage benefits for commercial, communal, and professional contingencies. In addition to enrolling as an entrepreneur, the businessman in question must register the workplace wherein workers will carry out their work. This will be done in the Dirección Provincial de la Tierra, the provincial directorate of the General Treasury of the Social Services of the province in which the work is located. It can be undertaken in a Social Security administrational offices of that province. And along with the registration, the entrepreneur or employer must open a contribution account in the TGSS of the province where the business is based, as many contribution accounts as there are work activities where the business is based. And many contribution accounts as there are work activities being carried out in the province should be open. In addition, the entrepreneur must request separate contribution accounts for specific groups of workers, especially when the possibility of different types of work, which will subsequently result in the need for different contribution accounts. Each one of the contribution accounts are assigned a code called this name to the Social Security. This code is often commonly known as the employee number. This number fundamentally serves as a form of just identification for the company. Aside from the main code, further codes will be assigned utilized to identify workspaces. Social Security membership for workers. In Spain, membership in the Social Security is obligatory for everyone, as it is an inherent part of the social structure. One's membership is not modified or influenced by changes in the Social Security system and will always remain unchanged. The entrepreneur or business owner is responsible for the Social Security application for each and every worker that they employ. This request must be made before the worker starts working in his or her employment. Management of the worker registration and leaves of absence. Formal registration, as you can see, employee obligation, communicate with the provincial representative in the province of the workplace and to report on sick leave, leaves of absence, changes in work, and so on. In addition, all the other paperwork concerning each employee and their professional transgressions, i.e. maternity or parental leave and medical notes, must be retained for a period of 4 years. It is important that registration should be accounted for before the beginning of the professional relationship, and leaves of absence due to 3 days following, during the 3 days following the cessation of work. Obligation to contribute. The obligation to contribute refers to the obligation on the part of contracted employees to contribute to Social Security systems by virtue of their registration before mentioned system. This obligation hinges on the employee's work contract, including the trial employment period, and both employment and contribution commence simultaneously, continuing through the time the worker is registered and all the time up through the way that the worker stops working or providing services to that company. It is important that the employee's discharge coincides with the completion of work, as it is necessary to submit a maximum of 3 days notice prior to the contract cessation. Established as a professional group. By definition, a professional group is one which brings together employee professionals for varying skills, qualifications, and degrees in order to undertake either general or more specific tasks, with the overarching goal being to assign appropriate responsibilities to the workers within that group. In addition, in relationship to professional grouping, the following 3 key elements must be considered: the professional skills, the professional qualifications, and content of the service rendered. The professional group is established by proxy of an agreement between the worker and the employer, thus ensuring the execution of all the list or at least some of the tasks during the aforementioned group. Once registration of the workers is undertaken, the employer should ascertain which professional group the worker belongs to, as this will initially determine the worker's task and function within the company. The distinction consists of 4 professional groups: technical, administrative, laborers, and subordinates. Within each of these general groups, we find subgroups, and these subgroups serve to distinguish the degree of specialization within each activity underlined by the employee. Delimitation of the group. It is important that the professional group distinguishes and demarcates workers based on their skills so as to ensure certain tasks are not overseen or undertaken by people either above or below their designated skill set. In addition, the establishment and definition of the professional group will be determine the financial compensation that each worker will receive on a monthly basis. However, in many cases, it may be the case that professional group duties are influenced by certain technical and organizational pressures, regulations by collective groups. In addition, in terms of definition, a collective group is an agreement reached between company representatives, employers, and employee representatives, usually unions, which have within these agreements, employers and employees regulate a variety of work conditions and establish a baseline of productivity. The resulting series of reciprocal obligations establishes a framework for working conditions and workplace governance. When discussing collective agreement, it is important to distinguish between company-specific agreements and sector-specific agreements. As such, a company agreement is one that has been agreed upon within a specific company and only has ramifications for the employees and employers of that company. On the contrary, sector-specific agreements affect all companies or businesses within a certain labor sector and specific work activity as well as all of their employees. Now, the evaluation of the employment position. When discussing the evaluation of jobs, we refer to the calculation of a wage based on a number of factors, such as qualifications, knowledge, experience, workday, working hours, responsibility, etc. When establishing salaries for a company, both the employer and the employee should keep in mind the professional group that the worker corresponds to, as well as the work that he or she performs. Thus, each company will have a system of calculating the value of the job, and in so doing, they must distinguish between professional category or group refers to the allocation of workers in it. Designation, just a moment please. Yes, refers to the allocation of workers in a designated group that have specific work function and establishment of a salary for that group. This decision is reached through an agreement between the employer and the employee while taking into account the terms established in the collective agreement. Job or professional categorization. Evaluation refers to the technical assessment of employment, level of education, qualifications, and other circumstantial quality measurements and their overall implication on a salary evaluation. This evaluation is the sole responsibility of the employer and is non-binding. Now we come to seniority. Seniority refers to the amount of time that a given worker has offered his services to a company. The first day of work is considered the beginning of that calculation. The training period, if applicable, is also included. Seniority is an important element to consider when determining bonuses or promotions and when calculating compensation in the case of disciplinary dismissals, layoffs, or terminations of the contract due to objective reasons. Establishment of a contribution group. Group that contributes to Social Security must be established. In Spain, there are a total of 11 groups that continue to contribute to Social Security, and each is comprised of various professional categories. Groups 1 to 7 contribute to Social Security monthly, while groups 8 to 11 contribute daily. As seen in the tables below, each group's median contribution is calculated at the end of the annual period and published on the Social Security website. The table is as follows. Communal overtime due to force majeure and overtime. In cases where new professional categories are created by proxy of a collective agreement, the category must be assimilated into one of these 11 preset groups. This resolution is undertaken by the TGSS or through those proposed by a labor authority. Some considerations to keep in mind with regard to this. Contribution group. It is important to note that the membership being in one group or another is not of the utmost importance, as the true importance is to receive salary. Professional category group, in which case it determines the minimum wage as established in agreement with each company depending on the services provided. The collective agreement occupies Now, just some consideration to be taken in mind. Professional category or group is that which determines the minimum wage and establishes an agreement with each company depending on the services provided. The collective agreement establishes salary tables which indicate the minimum wage corresponding to each of the 11 existing professional categories. In the categories which are mandated to contribute daily, the minimum wage base contribution is set in X euros per day. The process of determining whether a professional is categorized as each worker falls into depending on the variety of including education, experience, responsibility, and cooperation. Tax identification number. Every business has its own tax identification number, or NIF. The number is assigned at the time of the incorporation of the company or society. The number serves as the identification of every business and is used for the fiscal control of all their economic and commercial activities. It's very important that every employer, prior to undertaking any business maneuvers, such as recruitment, has an NIF number. The letters found in the NIF indicate the legal nature of the employer. If it has an A, it's a stock corporation. A B is a limited liability corporation. C is a business partnership. D, a limited partnership. Community goodness is E, community of goods. And finally, F is a cooperative society. There are some more. G is an association or foundation. H is a homeowners association. J is a civil society. And N is a foreign company. P is a local corporation. And Q is a public agency. R is a religious congregation or institution. S is a body of the general state administration and autonomous communities. U is a temporary coalition. The other types are yet undefined. And W is a permanent establishment of non-residents. Payslips, wages, accruals, wage payments. Accruals refer to the sum total of the amounts received by each worker. In this case, we must differentiate between wages paid, which are those which are a direct reflection of the work completed by the worker, and non-wages payment, which has no direct relationship to the work completed or services rendered. Wage payments contribute directly to Social Security, while non-wage payments are exempt as long as they do not exceed a certain amount. Following this introduction, the first issue dedicated to the work of Vice on Human Resources will discuss wages and salary supplements, withholdings and assumptions, registrations and insurance. Well, let's discuss the topics. Let us now look at salaries and salary supplements. The salary, well, as already mentioned, the salary is the amount of money received by the worker providing services for the company, and that is to say what the worker receives in exchange for performing the task for which he has been hired. In relationship to wages, we must consider two separate parts, the base salary and the salary supplements. The base salary is the compensation provided by the services rendered during a specific time of employment, not including other add-ons. The salary base mark is determined for each of the professional groups in the collective agreement. The base salary is established for a fixed period of time which may be annual, monthly, weekly, or daily, and refers to normal working days that comply with the required performance of the task or activity. Its value can be less than the legal minimum wage, known as the Spanish SMI, as long as the sum of the base salary combined with salary supplements exceeds the average. Currently, in Spain, this of course is 2022. Here's your daily, here's your monthly, and here's your annual. So minimum 10,302, 60 euros. Okay. It's worth noting that sometimes a worker receives what is called a bonus arrangement agreement, which is a fixed amount supplement that is either an hourly or daily addition to the base salary. It is an additional amount awarded as a function of the achieved performance in the workplace. Now we come to the salary supplements. As the name suggests, salary supplements are those additional amounts that are added to the basic salary of the worker depending on the number of principles that have been agreed upon in the collective bargaining and the labor contract processes governed by the workers' statute. With respect to this element, they complement the base salary. They may be grouped as the following categories: personal, job-related, by quality or quantity, and for a period over a month. Let us see the various aspects of each of these categories. The personal allowance, the salary supplements of a personal nature, are those that derive from the personal conditions of each worker that have not been included in base salary. This includes qualitative considerations such as seniority, qualifications, titles, degrees, fluency in other languages, etc. And in this case, we consider two principal supplements. The one for seniority, this complement is determined according to the time the worker has been employed by the company, 3, 5 years, whatever, and is decided by a collective agreement or set forth by an individual contract, and can take the form of a fixed amount or an incremental percentage of the base salary. It is important to note that the recognition of seniority as a complementary salary attribute is falling into disuse. Its use has been nullified in many companies and has been replaced by different concepts such as performance indicators or absenteeism. You may recall the very interesting little extra that the Honda plant has. If you are on time without exception for, I believe it's for 4 weeks, you add an extra 25 cents to an hour for all of those times. If you manage to do that for more than a month, it's another number, and more than 6 months, even more, 25 cents. But one time when you are late, it drops you to zero again, and you can start again. Special knowledge. This supplement is based on aspects such as extra training, knowledge of other languages, and other special skills on the part of the worker. Sometimes the salary is set based on these special skills, and if so, they will not be factored into the salary supplements. Salary supplements of the job. These payments of these allowances is entirely dependent on the completion of certain tasks by the workers. These supplements must not have been factored into any other aspect of the base salary and should be considered as valuation different from that of normal work. Some of the most common job salary supplements are contributed to stress, toxicity, and danger, and refers to situational or occupational habits that the hazards that the worker are subject to on the job and must be considered at a higher than normal risk in order for compensation to be offered. Or work shifts refers to when the workers are made to work uncomfortable shifts. This amount offered will be determined in either the collective agreements or the individual contract of the worker. Responsibility refers to workers taking on a heightened role of responsibility in their workplace. This special compensation will cease after the worker stops assuming these specialized roles. Night shift. The hours between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. will have a special remuneration as agreed to in the collective agreement. This complement is only accrued during days of service rendered to the company by the worker. Now we come to salary supplements for quality or quantity. These are supplements awarded to workers who go above and beyond their contribution to their company. The most common are the incentives or bonuses. They are supplements determined by the performance of the worker and are awarded by the employee. It reaches a goal set by the employer and achieves higher returns than normal. Then we have attendance and punctuality. These are supplements granted when the employee has an exceptional attendance record. I just referred to that in the Honda, and are offered to increase punctuality in the workplace. Extra hours are supplements granted to employees when they work hours that exceed those established by their employment contract. The amount paid for overtime must be greater than the received during the normal working hours as previously established by the collective agreement. Extensions of the working day refers to when the working day is extended to a longer than normal duration. Commissions refers to the pre-calculated economic supplement paid to the workers when they complete certain aspects of work or meet certain productivity goals as established in the contract or in the collective agreement. Commission are usually paid at the end of the fiscal year unless another form of payment has been decided upon in it differently. Commission amount is previously agreed upon in a free negotiation between the employer and the employee. If there is no prior agreement to the amount, then it should reflect customary commission practices in that industry or that local marketplace. And in case where commission is recognized as a sole form of payment, the SMI will be the minimum amount paid to the worker. At any moment, the worker or worker's legal representatives can request that the employer reviews industry standards in reference to the commissions. Now we come to salary supplements that mature every month. These supplements are periodic, not sporadic. They are accrued day by day and mature at a given time. They also include those payments relationally dependent on the earnings of the company unless otherwise agreed. These accruals are apportioned in a monthly manner as calculated from the base contribution to the SS, so that the accrued gross amount should be deducted from the worker's personal income tax. Some of these monthly salary supplements are extra pay. Every worker is entitled to a legal minimum of 2 special bonuses, one at Christmas and the other in June, or failing that, in the months decided upon in a fixed agreement between the company and the employee's legal representative. If otherwise decided in a collective agreement, these extra payments can be evenly distributed in a monthly manner or paid in 12 installments along with the standard salary. The amount of these payments is determined by either collective agreements or in the individual employment contract. In either case, the sum total cannot be inferior to the SMI, minimum acceptable wage. The accrual system is established to offer extra payments in proportion to the worker's contribution to the company on a semester or annual basis as pre-decided before their collection. And these accruals will cease during a period of temporary disability. However, whether by agreement or individual contract, these temporary disability remunerations will be reflected in wages, including overtime pay. As a general rule, these payments are only accrued in relationship to hours worked, including work time as well as periods of paid leave. However, whether by agreement or individual contract, these temporary disability remunerations will be reflected in wages, including overtime pay. In the case of daily supplements, once the employment contract finishes, the employee will receive a proportionate share of at the date at which termination occurred. Profit sharing is a supplement that is calculated using the percentage agreed upon by the financial year. In practice, this percentage should reflect other gains and losses of the company, such as sales volume. Collecting this is done during the first quarter of the following year, once the benefits can be calculated using the previous year's balance sheet and income statements. So far, both the base salary and the wage supplements are redistributed in the form of economic payments. However, we should consider another type of remuneration, which is one that is paid in kind. This payment is offered to the worker as a consideration of their work and contributions to the company, but does not take the form of money. It's important to note that in Spain there is a legal limit, which is no more than 30% of the total payment to the worker can take in the form of goods in kind. The following forms are kinds of in-kind payment: the provision of housing to an employee, either public or private, the use of a motor vehicle or other machinery, the provision of loans with interest rates below the legal amount, providing payments for housing, maintenance, etc., sponsorship for educational pursuits through financial means in the case of candidates pursuing academic careers not related directly to their job, and other payments of that same character. In order to learn more about in-kind remuneration, there is legislation available through the links, which you will have to translate from Spanish. Lastly, let us take a look at 2 final forms of allowance: bonuses and stock options. A bonus refers to compensation awarded to employees by employers for outstanding work and/or completion of specific objectives. Bonuses are typically offered in an effort to heighten employee productivity. They are also known to help boost sales and improve returns. All of the stipulations and criteria for payments of the aforementioned supplements should be established in the contract. While the amount usually varies, it is initially based on the pre-established maximums and minimums. The payment is usually performed annually and in arrears. The stock option is the right to stock shares in the company that an employee offers to their employer offers to employee. This means that the worker can acquire these shares for a certain period of time at a predetermined price set below the real market value of these shares. On this subject, it is worth commenting that these shares are not considered part of either wages or profit. They can be considered part of the employee's savings. If so, the savings received is the total economic amount that is obtained if the shares are bought below the existing market value. Now we come to non-wage payments. Thus far, we have talked about payments received by workers in the form of wages. In the subsequent section, we will discuss non-wage payments. Non-wage payments, also known as fringe payments, are those remunerations received by employees that are not in the form of money and are not in direct reflection of the work done for the company by the employees. Subsequently, all these supplements that are considered income or earnings have been considered as a contributory part of the Social Security or for taxpayers purposes. Under current legislation, the following are not considered a part of wage payments. Compensation provided to workers for expenses incurred as a result of the development of their job functions. Things such as transport costs, travel allowance, tools, wear, work equipment expenses, currency fluctuations, and so on. Let's take a look at different kinds of non-wage payments that workers are eligible to receive. Currency devaluation. This refers to the compensation that workers are eligible for following errors in payments and receipts involuntary losses. This compensation consists of a fixed amount and on some occasions takes the form of a percentage of the money with which the employee is provided to do certain work. This is decided through a prior agreement. The sum total of the currency devaluation is included in the contribution base. It is important to note that if the losses or errors were caused due to negligence on the part of the worker, they will not be entitled to compensation. Now we come to toolware. It is a compensation received by workers using their own tools or machines. It usually takes the form of a fixed monthly amount as specified in a work agreement. Workwear refers to reimbursements made by the employee who have to buy specific uniforms or garments for their work. Travel allowance is an allowance granted to workers that compensates them for costs accrued during business trips. And this includes meals, accommodation, travel costs, etc. Long distance and travel bonuses, as similar to travel allowances. In this case, the employee is compensated for having to travel and work far from home, and the cost will be covered by the employer. In those cases in which the requirements established for the benefits are met, the worker is paid a fixed daily or monthly amount established in the agreement. This remuneration will not be received during the holiday period or in those periods in which, for whatever reason, the employee has not worked. This is because it is a compensation directly linked to the actual displacement. Following are what are considered non-salary payments. Benefits and allowances of Social Security, temporary disability, paternity, and maternity leaves, and are not considered to be part of salary. Compensation following workplace transfers. In regard to the last item, when the worker is transferred to a place other than their original workplace, the worker will have the right to compensation for expenses or to terminate his or her contract and receive the compensation. In addition, the worker is entitled to compensation in similar cases such as layoffs, termination, or suspension of work activity, or the death of the employer. Some considerations for severance pay are termination and layoffs due to employment regularization procedures, disciplinary dismissal declared inadmissible, or employer breach of contract. In relationship to unfair dismissal or refusal to readmit employees on the part of the employer, compensation received for damages caused due to a substantial change in the working conditions. And now we come to payroll. Lastly, to the end of the first section, we will examine payroll and all of its features. It is important to take note that the conditions established in the contract as well as those set forth in the collective agreement with special consideration for minimum wage, compensation, and remuneration when creating payrolls for a company's workers. When referring to payroll, it is important to consider 6 fundamental aspects: the header, the wage payments, the non-wage payments, and the deductions, and the basis, and the dates and signatures. Now let us briefly deal with each of these concepts. This is the beginning of the payroll, and on it you will find an identifying information of the employee and the company. Following this are the structural aspects that will outline the worker's salary. These are called accruals and will include both wage and non-wage considerations. And the sum of all of these above is called a total accruals. The total accrual is the gross salary of the employee for which deductions will be applied, amongst which deductions for Social Security and tax deductions are on income. After these deductions, we receive the perceived salary or the net salary of the worker, which is the end amount that will be received each month. Now we come to wage payments. As already been discussed, both the base salary and the salary supplements are included in the wages, as determined by the collective agreement. Now we will discuss the day, month, and year after the worker will be paid. In the event that the agreement decides upon daily wages, daily wage should be multiplied by how many days there are in the month: 30, 31, 28, or 29. This should include the days that worked as well as the days of paid leave. On the contrary, if the agreement calls for a monthly payment and the worker has not worked the entire month, we will divide the salary by 30. That's an example payroll for 30. For July. If the payment is monthly, the payoff period will be on the 1st of July to the 31st of July, a total of 30 days. If the payment is daily, the period will be from the 1st of July to the 31st of July. In another section, which is called special payments, overtime, which should be included or added. For in-kind wages, we apply the following rules. Non-wage payments. As mentioned, non-wage payments are not considered intrinsically as part of the salary, and for this reason they do not contribute to Social Security, provided that they do not exceed a certain amount, excluding some special cases. An example of these are the special cases that are benefits received in the case of temporary disability that are paid by the Social Security deducted from the company's payroll. And in the case that it is a given month that has been a period of activity and another period of medical leave, we will have in the sections of salary payments the proportional amount. Now, when you look at the proportional amount of these things, you will find that there is a proportion of base salary and supplements in active days, and in the section of additional payments or subsidy received during the medical leave will be included if applicable. Both the company and the SS assumes a part, which will appear separately in this section. Finally, the total accrual appears, which is the total gross amount, thus adding the base salary and all the remunerated concepts. Now we come to deductions. The deductions are largely part workers' contribution to Social Security, which once calculated will be withheld from personal income tax. These special cases that had been given salary advances will be discounted, and the value of in-kind salary supplements will also be added at this point. As already mentioned, the total accrual amount is the sum of the base salary and all of the supplements, both wages and non-wage. Subsequently, some deductions are applied to the total accrual amount. Here's some of them. Social Security deductions, income tax deductions. Adding both deductions together gives us a full deduction. When we have applied this deduction to the total earnings, we have calculated the net salary with which the worker receives at the end of the month. So the worker's contribution to the SS, in order to calculate the deductions that are applied to the worker, the percentage and rates that are set by Social Security are included in the calculation. The rates set by Social Security are shown in this chart. Okay. A force majeure, by the way, would be an act of nature, basically, and it's a tornado or something like that that either makes it impossible for the employer to carry on business because their building was knocked down, or indeed, if there was a major flood and an employee was unable to make it to work, this also would be considered a force majeure. However, if the employee were involved in an accident, even if it was not the employee's fault, and they couldn't make it to work, that's not considered a force majeure, and that would be covered under other things such as insurance. Now, here's just a couple of examples of temporary contracts of less than 7 days. The effective duration of the company's contribution to the common contingency is increased by 36%, and it does not apply to interim contracts or to special systems for employed agricultural workers in the general regime. The supplement for common and occupational illnesses, accidents, and maternal leave is a payment delegated by order of Social Security to be made by the employee of the payroll and subsequently discounted on the TCI. Unemployment, 1.5% of the contribution based on the professional contingency. Vocational training, 0.1% of the contribution based on the professional contingency is used for courses. Overtime, which is comprised of two types: uncontrollable, made to prevent claims and accidents or to repair urgent damage, or others that do not correspond to the above description. Here are a couple of examples. In short, after a calculation of contribution basis and using the prior marked percentages, marked procedures, percentages, and the procedures to calculate SS discount on the employee's payroll. There are some examples: a common contingency, unemployment, training, overtime. Now we come to the basis. Contribution basis for Social Security. Contribution to Social Security is a duty of both the employer and employee. In regards to the worker, this contribution will be applied to the payroll monthly and will run parallel with their salaries. That is to say, the higher of the salary is the higher the contribution to Social Security. So you start from a base level, which is determined based on salary, which then applies percentages set by the government, and the result is the fee that will be applied to the payroll. As for the contribution basis, we must distinguish three types. Contribution based on common contingencies corresponding to common illnesses or non-working accidents. There are not here non-work accidents. Contribution based for professional contingencies corresponding to occupational sickness, workplace accidents, wage guarantee funds, and unemployment and vocational training, and then contribution based for overtime. The first two will appear on each payroll, whereas the third is only calculated if you have worked overtime during that pay period. Contribution based for contribution or common contingency. There are four types to follow. Calculate workers' monthly compensation. You take the amount of all salary payments, excluding overtime for professional contingency and extra payments, plus all excess non-wage payments. Calculate the proportional part of each and extra wage payment and pay benefits if applicable. Now, we will discuss additional apportionment of the extra payments. This consists of adding the bonuses for a given month to the monthly salary. Every bonus will be charged in full on certain predetermined dates and will include a proportional part of the base contribution for each month. It must be considered whether the employee will be remunerated monthly or daily, which is dependent on the contribution group they are considered to be part of. Monthly payments, we add the amount of annual bonuses and divide by 12, for there are 12 months in the year. Daily payments, sum of all the annual aggregate of all the bonuses and divide by 365 or 366 in a leap year. The result will be multiplied by how many days are in that month or in the number of days that the employee worked during that month. So to calculate the total sum of all the monthly payments and bonuses, the check basis, Check that the total, the sum of the monthly salary and the bonuses calculate into the prior step, is framed within the minimum and maximum contribution base according to the professional category of the worker and that of their contribution group. You cannot contribute more or less than the figure established by your professional category. If the total amount aggregated is between the aforementioned bases that correspond to the contribution base for payroll in common contingencies. If the total amount calculated is less than the minimum base, then the minimum base is adjusted to reflect this new figure. Similarly, if the number calculated is more than the maximum base, the maximum base is adjusted, thus resulting in new basis. Contribution basis for professional contingencies. Drawing from the common contingency contribution basis, we will follow these steps. Take the sum of the monthly salary along with the fair apportionment of extra pay and overtime in the case of overtime having been worked. Take into account the contribution ceiling. The maximum and minimum for professional categories are the same for the 11 professional categories. They are understood as periods of 30 days. Then check that the sum falls in between these two buffers. If the sum is between the bases, then it is considered the contribution base for the professional contingencies in the payroll. If it is above or below these bases, then the base is adjusted as needed. In the case that payroll is not considered a 30-day period, the procedure is to take the minimum and maximum and divide it each separately by 30, thus obtaining a buffer day for both maximum and minimum. Then multiply by the number of days of payroll, resulting in the maximum and minimum salary buffers. We must check that the sum of the monthly salaries and bonus payments and overtime is found between these two buffers. If we so end up with this sum as the base, otherwise we will use the buffer as the base. Contribution basis for overtime. Overtime hours worked appeared on the payroll each month. Their contribution base coincides with the amount agreed upon to be paid to the employees for overtime. Base subject to income tax withholding. This refers to the amount that the income tax rate is applied to. This usually is proportionate to the total accrued except when travel costs, compensation, severance pay, or forms of in-kind salary supplements appear on the payroll. Dates and signatures. The settlement dates appear on the payroll, usually in arrears. The deadline is the last business day of each month. The signature and/or stamp of the company also appears on the payroll, although in the case of payment by the bank transfers, the signature is not required. Below are some of the important things not to neglect or to forget when completing the payroll. You must know the complete composition of the worker's wage. This includes the worker's salary along with wage and non-wage supplements. You must divide wage supplements by those that contribute to Social Security and those that do not, those that contribute to the contribution base or not. Get the full accrual, commonly referred to as the gross salary. It is comprised of the base salary and the overtime and the supplements. Determine the monthly payoff. Calculate special payments, otherwise referred to as salary supplements. Regardless of how the extra payments are undertaken, they are normally paid off on a monthly basis. Calculate the contribution base for common contingencies by adding the bonuses and supplements to the monthly salary. Calculate the contribution base for professional contingencies, again by adding the salary supplement to the monthly salary. Determine the base subject to income tax deductions. In most cases, it will coincide with the total accrued unless you have some supplementary salary additions that are not subject to withholdings. Calculate the deductions to the worker by adding Social Security contributions and income tax withholdings. Calculate the received salary by subtracting the deductions from the total accrued, and you will arrive at the net salary to be paid to the worker. For more information about payroll, refer to the annex where we will have provided several examples. Now we come to withholdings and assumptions. Deductions. One of the major obligations of an employer or entrepreneur is to oversee personal income tax withheld from the economy payouts made to their employees. Withholding is subtracting a part of that amount to be paid, usually for tax purposes. In summary, it is the amount of tax that is withheld from the employee's paycheck. The gross amount to be paid during the calendar year should be taken into account when determining the percentage of personal income tax to be withheld. In other words, a worker's yearly salary. This percentage is modified under the current rule in the case of both fixed compensation and variable compensation. In relationship to the worker's salary, both wage and non-wage payments must be taken into account. Thus, yields are considered as the aggregate of direct and indirect forms or in-form, monetary, and in-kind wages. The following are subject to withholdings: salary, both the base wage and the salary supplements; bonuses and compensation awarded that exceed the allotted tax charges; unemployment benefits, except those received in a lump sum payment form; Social Security pensions, except for those granted for permanent disability or severe disability; subsidies for temporary disabilities; benefits offered during a high-risk pregnancy; compensation for representative expenditures; allowances for travel costs; wages received in place of regular wages after workplace dismissal during the sentencing time if brought to trial; supplements paid by company under the auspices of Social Security for the total permanent disability or retirement funds; allowances for expenses accrued in the municipality of the worker's workplace; the amount that exceeds the legal standard for travel costs, catering costs, accommodation, and maintenance. Benefits received by the beneficiary of pension plans regulated by the Directive 2003. Benefits received by the beneficiary of insurance contracts concerted with social welfare. Benefits received by the beneficiary of corporate pension plans and guaranteed pension plans. Benefits received by the beneficiary of dependency insurance under the law to promote personal autonomy and care for parent dependents. Yields that have been given conferences, classes, etc. Yields for developing literary, artistic, and scientific works. Spousal alimony. Scholarships that are not subject to exemption under Article 7. However, not to be taken into account are the allowances within the margins established by regulation, travel costs within the margins established by regulation, severance pay. Thus, the total amount will encompass fixed and variable payments received by the worker for a year. It is also important to note that the amount may not be less than the payout received in the prior year, except by special circumstances. These allowances can take either a monetary or in-kind form, and as previously mentioned, in-kind refers to goods or services offered free or below the cost of market value. When determining what percentages of in-kind salary supplements are to be withheld, the following standards should apply. For example, using a home owned by the payer, 10% for the cadastral value, 5% of the cadastral value in effect in January 1st, 1994, 5% on 50% of the value of the purpose for the purpose of wealth tax. If it falls short of the cadastral value, it cannot exceed 10% of the remaining employee benefit. Now, for those of you who, like me, have no clue what the word cadastral means, here is a definition. Basically, when you're talking about the use of the home, it's based on the recorded value of the home, that sort of thing. And so it's, and then there'll be a certain number or a time. Yes, and in this case, it happens to be January 1994. Anyway, moving on, use of delivery of motor vehicles. In the case of delivery, the acquisition cost of the payer, including levy taxes in case of use, 20% of the annual cost. If the vehicle is not owned by the payer, the percentage will be applied to the market value as if it were due. In case of use after delivery, the valuation would be the same as before. On loans with interest below the legal standard, the difference between the interest paid and the legal rate in effect during the time of that period. Bear in mind that these are considered to be benefits. Other considerations to take into account when withholding income tax are: none of the amount that do not exceed normal margins will be taken, only those that do will be. In some cases, the extra payments will be predictable and in others not. For this reason, it is important to establish some sort of preemptive framework for withholding. In cases where a worker has a fixed term contract, the withholdings will only be taken out during the duration of the contract and not the entire calendar year. When a worker starts their employment contract after the 1st of January, their work should be considered to take place within that calendar year. The percentage of withholdings is calculated from the beginning of the year or on the date that the calendar starts. This percentage will be maintained throughout the year, except as mentioned before, and in special cases, such as the serious economic changes or personal issues. Here is a link to the tax agency where you can access the calculation for withholding. The steps to follow as a company in order to calculate the total amount of remuneration are as follows: calculation of the total amount of remuneration, calculation of the tax base, calculation of the taxable income, tax adjustments for the taxpayer's family and personal circumstances, determination of withholding rate, calculation of tax withholding, regularization. It is important to note that the calculation of the withholding rate is very complex and very difficult to calculate manually. For this reason, we attached the previous link. However, it is important to understand the factors that contribute to the calculation of the end product. Now let us take a look. Calculation of the total amount of payments. Here we calculate the total amount in cash or in kind which the taxpayer received in the calendar year. As such, we consider the base salary, the wages and non-wage supplements, bonuses and overtime. Depending on the end sum of these elements, there may or may not be any obligation to withhold, and there is a minimum that excludes from the obligation to withhold. However, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to income, and different amounts are set and based on both personal income and the number of descendants and/or dependents. The exclusive quantitative limits of obligation to withhold can be found in Article 81 of the Income Tax Regulation, as seen on the following link. Calculations of the tax base, B1, and the next tax, BL. BI, I apologize. BI is defined as the quantity upon which the tax is calculated. When we refer to the calculation of income tax, we must consider two types, BI, general, and net. The general tax base is the one that is formed by work output, capital returns, allocations of revenue and losses, and the capital gains. In other words, it integrates practically all the revenue generated by the worker during the fiscal year. The taxable net base, also called savings, is the result of subtracting the incurred losses from the gains. To better understand how to calculate BI and BL, we will focus on Article 15 of the Income Tax Act. A series of reductions are performed in order to obtain the tax base and net base. Here we present those reductions, accompanied by their respective legislative articles so that they can be fully understood. For obtaining the BI, we make the following reductions. Irregularity reductions. According to Article 18, the reductions are considered irregular when they are accrued over 2 years and have not been accrued on a regular basis. Article 18, withholding rates are applicable to certain earned incomes. Reduction from or in earned incomes. These incomes are considered to be any gross salary incomes in the form of profits, regardless of denomination or nature, and can be monetary or in kind. Thus, they are considered employment incomes, salaries, and salary supplements, while excluding the aforementioned special cases. To calculate the net return, we refer to Article 19 of the law as a reduction for which is governed by Article 20 of the very same law. Once we have carried out these reductions, we have calculated the BI. The next step is to calculate the reductions that will be allow us to calculate the BL. These reductions are the reductions for situations of dependency and aging. These reductions are governed by Article 51, 52, and 53. Tax adjustments for family and personal circumstances. Adjustments to income for family and personal circumstances of the taxpayer are expressed in personal and family allowances, the function of which is to determine the portion of these allowances that are not subject to taxation. As with the previous withholding, information on minimums will be found in Law 35, specifically in the following articles: 46 for personal and family minimums, 58 for the minimum for children, 59 for parents. Yes, that's the care of parents. That was what the antecedents were. 60, the minimum for disability. 61, the common rules for application of minimum in the case of children. parents or disabilities. Determination and calculation of the withholding rate. Determining the withholding rate as governed by Article 63 and 66 of the Law 35, considering both general and income and savings. General income includes all types of income, including capital gains and losses that are not considered part of the saving, and is used to calculate tax withheld for earned income. Savings income refers to the benefits derived by movable capital as well as gains and losses, including transfers of assets. Management of international financial services. Here are the articles to give you further information about tax withholdings. State tax rate, general tax scale, tax rates on savings, regional tax rate, regional tax scale, amount of prepayments. In calculating the general withholding tax, we will use the Royal Decree 2004 to 2009, which modifies the regulation of income tax for individuals, establishing a new formula for the calculations. As mentioned before, this is very difficult to calculate manually. Refer to the tax agency link to use this equation. Regularization, the last phase, it refers to the potential recalculation of the application withholding. Regularization is regulated by Article 687 of the Royal Decree. It is worth noting that there are a number of circumstances that occur throughout the year that can result in a recalculation and potential readjustment of the applicable withholding. These circumstances can be grouped into two categories: those that affect the relationship with the payer and those that fall under personal and family circumstances. The following are circumstances that affect the relationship with the payer: extensions or renewals of the contract within a fiscal year, salary changes due to general regulations or collective agreements, raises, promotions and demotions, unforeseen variations, new pension accruals. Some examples of changes in personal and family circumstances are as follows: an increase in the number of offspring, disabilities, or handicaps suffered by family members, the initiation of alimony payments between spouses, when there is tax-related changes in regard to dependency due to one spouse becoming newly employed or receiving a higher income, variations that may occur in relationship to parents. If during the calendar year the taxpayer communicates a 2-point reduction in the rate of tax withheld, the taxpayer is granted the right to deduct for residential investment using borrowed funds. In the case that any of the above-mentioned circumstances come into effect, the taxpayer must recalculate the applicable withholding. When the withholding is recalculated due to the changes in employment type, that withholding will be recalculated and changed immediately. However, when said withholding is changed due to personal circumstances, the changes will be applied as soon as possible and must be communicated at least 5 days prior to making of the payroll. A regularization of the withholding type means calculating a new annual amount of tax rate to be applied. The new tax rate withheld will be calculated as a result of dividing the new annual amount of deductions from the withholdings payable until the end of the year multiplied by 100. For workers who become taxpayers by way of changes in their place of residence, the new withholding amount will be reduced by the amount of withholding payments on the taxable amount for the change of residence, as well as the fees incurred by the tax. The following is the formula used to calculate the new percentages, if indeed resulting between the new sum of the deductions minus withholdings divided by the total amount of remuneration remaining before the end of the year multiplied by 100. If the result is 0, refunds for pre-existing withholdings will not be needed. Consequently, the payer may request his or her return when filing income tax. On the new withholding rate, we must consider maximum limits for the new withholding rate. The new type of withholding shall not be increased due to new adjustments that mandate a decrease in the deduction basis, or when the payee has to comply with child support due to a court order, if the amount is smaller than the deduction base. In addition, in circumstances that require an increase in the tax base for calculating the pre-regularization retention, the new rate may not result in an increase in the amount of higher retention proportionate to the increase produced by the aforementioned base. The new type of retention cannot exceed 45%, and 23% is when the total of all the yields would have been obtained in situa or malila. Now we have beneficiary obligation. In the case of personal and family circumstances that affect the withholding type, workers must notify and subsequently prove the validity of their claim. The existence of potential and/or predicted personal or family circumstances must be communicated to the employer prior to the first day of each calendar year or before the start of the employee's relationship. The payee must keep and sign evidence that justifies and supports his or her claim. Lack of communication on the part of the payee in regards to personal and family situations will determine which type of withholding are applicable using the information in question. The payee can recover the difference if the tax agency ultimately approves a refund, as outlined in Model 104, or when filing his or her tax return. Variations in personal and family circumstances occurring during the year and incurring a lower rate of withholding tax will be forwarded for regularization and will be effective for the date of communication, provided the communication is made 5 days or more prior to the payroll. When these retentions pose a higher rate of withholding tax, they must be reported within 10 days. Notifications does not have to be reiterated yearly if the details remain unchanged. Notification shall be made using the official form for the purpose. Model 145. False or falsified reports or changes to data are considered a tax violation. This may be sanctioned if the alleged application is granted a lower withholding than that which is legally admissible. The falsification of withheld amounts, and that those that should be retained have been considered misconduct and is considered a very serious misconduct if the amount constitutes 50% or more of the tax. The penalty will be proportional amount between 50 and 100% for serious conduct, or from 100 to 150% if it is considered a very serious conduct. applications of the percentage of withholding. Once we have calculated the percentage of personal tax withheld, we need to know what quantity we are going to apply. The general rule is to apply the total accrued as found on the payroll. To calculate the base of subject to withholding, we must bear in mind that there are a number of concepts that are not subject to withholding. And these concepts are the accommodation and maintenance of expenses, the transportation cost, the severance payments, transfers, suspensions, terminations, or deaths. There are also subject to withholding. These are also subject to withholding when they exceed the established limits that were prior referenced. Finally, and to end this section, you will find a link to Law 35 on income tax for individuals. Severance. Whilst examining the concept of withholdings and assumptions, it is important to talk about severance. As defined, severance is a document that reflects the pending payments accounts that our company has to with the employee when the employee's relationship or contract is broken. Whether the employee is discharged from the company or the employee decides to end his employment prematurely, it is considered a compulsory payout either way. During the process of this settlement, the only things that will be liquidated are existing debts owed to the worker. Thus, when examining a severance settlement, the following items should be considered. Outstanding salaries or salary deductions. These include base salary as well as wage or non-wage salary supplements that are scheduled to be paid at the end of the employment contract. For example, if the contract ends on January 5th, all of the wage and non-wage supplements for that month must be considered. Proportional share of bonuses. By law, workers are entitled to at least a biannual bonus, one during Christmas holiday and the other during the month of June. Considering the amount of time necessary to make payments, two types of payments should be distinguished. Semi-annual accruals, payments when the accrual period is every 6 months. The worker begins to earn at the beginning of the calendar year or at the start of the employment contract, so the pay accrues through the semester and upon being paid. At the end of 6 months, the next semester of accruals commences. For example, if an employee starts working on the 1st of January, he or she will be entitled to two payments, one on the 30th and the other on the 31st of September. That, my friend, is a typo. That is a definite typo, because it's the 31st of December on account of September doesn't even have 31 days. And that's funny. Wow. Okay. In cases where the employment is not continued through a full month, possibly due to having started the contract mid-month, the pay is calculated daily. Let us examine the concepts of daily and monthly payment. In the case of monthly payment, all months are considered to have 30 days, and in the aforementioned case of incomplete months, daily wages are computed. A daily payment is calculated based on how many days that are left and that are in the given month. Let us say that a worker finalizes his contract on the 7th of April. The proportion of the payments is as follows. Monthly payment, 97 out of 180 are paid for the month of June. December bonuses are unpaid. The 97 days correspond to January 30th, 30 days of February, 30 days of March. Notice the use of the 30 days of February, 7 days in April. All right. 180 days are 30 days times 6. For daily payments, 97 of 181 of June's bonus. The December bonus is unpaid. The 97 days correspond to the 31st of January and 28 days in February and 31 days. Notice the use of 28 days for February here and not 30, and so on and so forth. 31 days actual specifics. Therefore, you have total of 181, and so on and so forth. The annual accrual. When the payment period is comprised of 12 months, in this case, the two bonuses are accrued throughout the year. When the worker begins his contract, both payments start to accrue. When the first payment bonus is paid, the same bonus of the subsequent year will start to accrue the following day. In the case of an employee starting with the contract on the 1st of February, he or she is entitled to one bonus in June and one in December. Yeah, that's what we were talking about, the 30th. It's December 31st of December. Big typo up there. In the month of June, he will receive the first half of his two bonuses. In December, he will receive the second, and he will therefore have received 100% of his government-mandated biannual bonuses. If the contract is prematurely terminated, the worker will receive first year 6 out of 12, then out of 12 out of 12 bonus, rest of the year 12 out of 12 bonus, 12 out of 12. In those cases in which the worker receives a daily payment, or we cannot count the entire month because the contract ends before the end of the month, we must compute based on days, and therefore count the exact days without rounding to 30. Unutilized vacation time. By law, workers are entitled to enjoy a total of 30 holidays per working year, which translates into 22 business days. Furthermore, a great number of vacation days may be established via a collective agreement or an individual agreement with employer or employee. With that being said, the number of vacation days will always be greater and never less than 30 calendar days. This vacation time should be enjoyed during the calendar year, and after the 31st of December, remaining vacation time expires. However, some collective agreements extend the applicatory time for the first 3 months of the following year. Holidays are necessary and inalienable aspects of a worker's rights and cannot be offset by compensation. The only exception to this is found in the cases where the employment contract was terminated prematurely before vacation time was taken, and in this can be compensated as part of the severance package. It is important to note that in the case of temporary employment, holidays can be compensated economically as decided upon in the contract. During vacation leave, the employee receives a salary comparable to that which he or she is paid with the actual actively working. And the premise of this composition is that salary accruals are discontinued unless the employment agreement specifically says otherwise. Overtime, hazard pay, and other salary supplements are not recognized. The calculation of unused vacation time in regards to severance pay is as follows. If the worker is paid monthly, all salary supplements will be considered except those mentioned above. Hypothetically, if the employment contract ends on November the 30th and the worker has not exercised any of his vacation time, he will be compensated for his unused vacation days. In the 12 months, he has 30 vacation days, and he worked 11 months. Therefore, 11 times 30 divided by 12 is 27.5. As such, we calculate the compensation payable to the workers. In the event that the worker has taken some vacation days, you would subtract those days already used. When calculating vacation time, it is important to distinguish between daily and monthly payments. Monthly is considered to be comprised of 360 days, as months are considered to have 30 days. Daily payments are 365 days, or 366 in the case of leap years. Regardless, when the employment contracts are terminated earlier than anticipated, the calculation will account for the days that are worked. Forewarning: in the case of termination of contracts for periods of less than a year, 15 days prior notice is not required, unless specifically called into a collective agreement. By contrast, for contracts of a year or more, a prior notice of 15 days for employment termination, and even more if specified in a collective agreement, is mandated. If such notice is not provided, then the employee is entitled to compensation equivalent to the amount of days that the employee failed to notify. When calculating the compensation for failure to appropriately notify, both salary and bonuses are taken into account. Compensation, it is always required when a worker is dismissed. The amount of compensation is determined by the reason for dismissal, and specifically affected by whether the dismissal was deemed admissible or inadmissible. The most common reasons for termination, early termination of employment contract on behalf of the employers are termination because of the death of the employer. This is not technically considered a layoff, but the employee is entitled to compensation equal to 1 month's work. Termination of a legal entity of the company. When this transpires, all of the company's work contracts are terminated. If this collective termination is caused by economic, technical, or organizational causes, the employees are entitled to the corresponding compensation. Such compensation is equivalent to 20 days salary per year work with a maximum of 12 installments, unless a larger compensation period was agreed upon prior to this. The following are the different types of dismissals that should be considered. Dismissals due to an objective cause. According to Article 52 of the Statutes of Workers, there are considered to be objective grounds for dismissal. Here they are. Inaptitude on the part of the worker after having passed a trial period. In the case of indefinite government or NGO employment contract, when workers improperly undertake programs or inappropriately allocate project economic resources. The need to redeem workers due to economic, technical, or organizational reasons, and in the case of intermittent, even if justified, absenteeism. Faced with this type of dismissal, the employer will compensate the employee with the equivalent of 20 days of salary per year work, the maximum payout of 12 installments. The compensation is then apportioned monthly for a period of less than a year. If the worker does not agree with the dismissal, the case must be brought to court where the type of dismissal will be evaluated by the court system. Some examples of possible outcomes. Lawful dismissal. If deemed lawful, the employer must compensate the employee as explained above. But if it's an unlawful dismissal, in this case, the employer is faced with two options. Rehire the worker and compensate them for the wages not received during the legal position and the employment relationship, and compensate the employee. And in this case, the worker will be compensated with the equivalent of 33 days of wages per year worked, resulting in a maximum of 24 months payments, or a monthly installment for compensatory periods of less than a year. It is important to note that the above-mentioned compensation is specific to those contracts signed after February 12, 2012. Now we come to collective dismissal. A dismissal is considered a collective dismissal when, within a period of 90 days, the majority of the staff is affected, or more specifically, when it affects 10 or more workers in a company that has a staff of under 100, 10% of the staff if for a company that is employed between 100 and 300, 30 or more workers if the company is staffed by over 30 employees. These types of layoffs are caused by economic, technical, organizational, or production pressures. The Spanish Employment Regulations government body is in charge of carrying out this process. The minimum compensation for collective dismissal is the equivalent of 20 days of salary per year worked with a maximum payout of 12 installments. This minimum can be improved upon through negotiation between the employer and employee representative due to the consultation period. Disciplinary dismissal. A disciplinary dismissal is the termination of an employment contract due to an employee's serious breach of his or her duties or obligations to the company. The reasons for such a dismissal are as follows: repeated and unexcused absences or punctuality problems, disobedience or lack of discipline in the workplace, verbal or physical abuse towards the employer, co-workers, or family members of the co-worker, abuse of trust or breach of good faith obligated by contract, continuous decrease in workplace performance as compared to the standards established in either the contract or the collective agreement, drunkenness or drug addiction, harassment of coworkers or employees on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, disability, age, or sexual orientation. In those cases wherein the employee does not agree with the decision of the employer, be it either objective or disciplinary in nature, said employee must take action within 20 days. The case will be brought to the court, and they will rule whether the dismissal is lawful or unlawful. Lawful dismissal. In this case, the worker is therefore not entitled to any compensation. Unlawful dismissal. The company has two options, as previously discussed on page 50. If the worker if the employee opts for reinstatement of their prior job, they are entitled to compensation for the duration of the judicial period. Alternately, if they opt for compensation, the employee must compensate them for the equivalent of 33 days of salary per year work with a maximum of 24 monthly installments. Then we have nullified dismissal. The company must re-employ the worker and pay the wages equivalent to the judicial process as they have violated the fundamental rights of the worker. Moreover, the company needs to pay the salaries that accrue during the proceedings. The following box outlines the calculation that is used in the case of dismissals. Severance table for termination of employee. Mutual agreement, compensation as agreed. Appropriate to the contract. It is appropriated. Employment, yes. Expiration of the agreed time, 8 days per year, yes. Voluntary departure, no. So if you quit your job, you don't get unemployment. Termination due to transfer, change of workers, yes. Termination due to changes in the working hours, yes. But there's limits. Notice the limits. Voluntary termination on behalf of the worker due to substantial changes in the working conditions. 33 days of salary for wages per year. Yep. 24 months. That looks like 24 months of unemployment. Voluntary termination on behalf of the worker due to serious infringement on the part of the employer. 33 days. Yep. Employee death. 15 days of salary wages. And of course, no unemployment. Retirement, no. Death, retirement, or disability of the employer, a 1 month salary. Termination of the legal entity of the employer, 20 days per year calendar worked. And also, we keep going here. Objective dismissal, 20 days of salary per year work, and they can go for unemployment. Collective dismissal due to economic, technical, organizational, 20 days per year, and yes, they can get unemployment. Uncontrolled forces, force majeure, 20 days, and they can get unemployment. Disciplinary deemed inadmissible, 33 days. Objective dismissal deemed inadmissible, 33 days, and again, 24 days. Lower examples of calculated compensation. First, we calculate the number of days that an employee is entitled to, taking into account the reason for dismissal and its legitimacy. An employee dismissed for objective reasons that has been in the employment of the company for 3 years, 4 months, and 8 days results in the following equation. 3 years, 20 times, 4 months, 8 days, that would be 8.3. Okay. If the 20 days corresponds to 12 months, times days, the number of corresponds to the 5 months, 8.3 is the days of compensation. The amount of compensation is calculated based on the number of days. Keep in mind that the compensation is comprised of base salary, salary supplements received by the workers in the 12-month period prior to the end of the work, and bonuses. A worker has monthly compensation of base salary, this many euros, and other bonuses. Compensation is calculated in accordance with 65 days. Base salary, here we have some calculations. The average salary is divided by 7, and for the salary pending process, the salaries waiting to be processed are calculated in the same way. It will be paid per calendar year and will be quoted in the month following the notification.